Hey, what's up? This is Keanu Raves, here today to give you a track breakdown of my track Just Farming Gems, taken from my recent release on the UK label Mood Supplier. So the EP dropped in December last year. Just Farming Gems, this was the lead single from the release, and I received some really amazing feedback from some pretty big artists that I really respect a lot. For the EP and this track in particular, so I thought I'd try something new and record a little bit of a breakdown of how I made the track. And if you enjoy this, then definitely let me know, and I'd be keen to maybe make some more videos like this in the future. Cool, so I'll just play a little bit of the track. Of course, you can check that out on SoundCloud, Bandcamp, Spotify, all the usual platforms, so you can hear the proper mastered and released version. But I'll just play a little snippet just before the drop at 165, and then I'll walk through some of the elements. Cool as. So I'll start with the low end. That was the first kind of part of the track that I put together. So just a kick and sub bass line, which I've got grouped into a low end group here. So I'm going to solo that low end group. So you can have a listen to just the kick and bass. Alright, so kick. Fairly straightforward, 4 to the floor kick with a couple of samples layered up together. So I'll just quickly show you each of the samples there in isolation. So you can hear there that one of the where'd I go? Yeah, this sample here is the main kick sound, and I've just layered up a little extra percussive hit on top for a little bit of top end click, and then a little bit of extra low end boom from this additional sample here. So 3 kicks layered up together, trying my best to avoid phase issues by just adjusting the start position of the sample there, so that the transients and all of that are nicely lined up together. So that's the kick. Now processing, fairly straightforward, bit of overdrive to beef up and saturate the main sample. Just side chained the sub layer to the main kick a little bit, just to help keep the decay under control, so it doesn't kind of get in the way of the main sample there. And then of course just a typical high pass filter, get rid of some of that unnecessary low end rumble. So that's the kick. Not the most exciting kick that I've ever made, if I'm honest, but you know, it's effective, it works well in context. The sub bass line sounds like this in isolation. Now the actual sound itself is fairly simple, as you can hear, but what I'm really happy with in particular is the sequence. I think that this is a really kind of catchy, compelling sequence which plays off the kick nicely and really kind of hooks in the listener straight away. And yeah, basically once I had the kick in that and just that sub bass sequence there, I knew I had something good. So the sequence there, you can see, is fairly simple, half bar loop, very standard. I used the MDD Snake Max for Live sequencer plugin to actually come up with the sequence. You can look that up, there's plenty of videos on that, highly recommend that. It's a great free sequencer for Ableton. So I kind of randomized the settings on that a couple of times until it came up with a sequence that I was happy with, and then I recorded the MIDI output into Ableton so that I could actually manipulate the MIDI further if I needed to. So the sound itself is a very simple operator patch. So ooh, that's interesting actually. Thought I was going to say it was just a sine wave with a little bit of FM for additional harmonics, but it looks like I've actually used one of the different waveforms rather than a sine wave as the starting point for the carrier signal. Unusual, I don't normally do that, but looks like I decided to experiment a little bit in this instance. And we have just a little bit of frequency modulation to add some additional harmonics to the sound, and I've got a sine wave sub layer an octave below this carrier here as well. Following that, bit of overdrive to beef it up, and an amp simulator, and then an additional amp simulator which I've got in an effect rack here. So just to show you what that all kind of sounds like. So the original operator sound, quite clean. We'll add the overdrive, just warms it up a little bit. The amp simulator, very subtle, but I really love this preset, bass roundup, just from the stock Ableton presets of the amp simulator. I really like that on synth bass sounds. Just feel like it just gives the sound a bit of additional body and presence. And finally, I've got an audio effect rack here where I've split the signal into two channels, so the low and mids are unaffected, and the high frequencies are run through an additional amp simulator just to create a bit of extra crunch on top. Nice, that side chain to the kick, and together we have our kick and bass line. Quickly just on the low end group there, so I've got a little bit of reverb and some additional overdrive on the low end group just to help kind of gel them together, and a little bit of EQ as well just to further shape the sound. So you can have a quick listen to. I mean, it sounds pretty fine without all of that, but the reverb just brings a bit of extra character, puts it into a theoretical space, if you will. Overdrive just helps to glue it together, warm it up a little bit, and interestingly enough, you might hear it does actually end up kind of cutting some of the low-end sub-frequencies as well. Which in isolation is typically not what I would have wanted to do on my low end group, cut a bunch of low end and sub, but actually in the context of the mix, the low end without the overdrive was a bit much, so happy with that. Moving on. God, don't want this video to be too long, but it's probably going to end up being about 30 minutes. So after I came up with the kick and bass line, the next element which came into play was the lead synth line. Now this is actually made up of a couple of different layers, so I've got them all grouped together here. So I'm going to solo just the leads. Quick run through one by one. So this is essentially what I've done is I used MDD Snake again to come up with the actual sequence. So initially both the call and response pattern. Here's the call, and here's the response. So originally those sequences were just one sequence that generated with MDD Snake, and after I recorded the MIDI output into Ableton, then I actually split the sequence into two different MIDI clips so that I could create a more impactful kind of call and response effect by having different sounds for the call and the response. So the main lead sound that plays the call is a granulator patch. So I've just essentially taken a random, well, not completely random, I selected it by ear, but yeah, it doesn't really matter what the initial sample is, just a little kind of synth one shot I found in a sample pack. Can't even remember which sample pack, to be honest. And then what I've done is manipulated the grain as well as a few other additional parameters of the granulator plugin, filter cutoff, additional filter, and then you can see I've got delay and reverb as well in this instrument rack. So let me just solo that lead sound, turn off some of the additional effects just so we can quickly hear the raw sound of the granulator, I think. So, fairly interesting sound, quite unique I would say, out of the granulator via the sample. And yeah, you can see that I'm automating the grain to add some additional movement and variation to the sound. The original sound actually had quite a lot of kind of stereo difference going on there, so I've just used a utility plugin to cut down a lot of that side content because it was a little bit kind of distracting and chaotic, and then so I've essentially kind of reduced the width of the signal, if you will, and then using my own delay and reverb later on added that stereo depth back to the signal, but in a way in which I can control it myself a lot better. So just gentle compression as well. So there's the patch. We'll add our delay and reverb. Amp simulator. And overdrive. So that's the main lead sound, and then what I've done, just to kind of keep the interest and build up the tension arrangement wise, is I've just duplicated this channel twice, and essentially at different parts in the arrangement I just have a copy of the sequence up 6 semitones, so it kind of clashes a bit, creates a bit of tension, and then another copy up an octave higher as well. So at various points in the arrangement I can just bring those kind of harmonies and octave layers in and out. Too easy, mate. And finally we've got the response. So pretty similar setup here, again using the granulator, just with I think a different synth sample. Did I use a different synth sample? Yep, I sure did. Different synth sample, different delay and reverb, amp simulator, etc, etc. But again, very key is that throughout the track I'm automating the grain from the granulator as well as the reverb and delay parameters as well, just to create some variation and movement. So nice all together. Let's add our kick and bass. So that's how the track came together initially. Started with the kick and bass line. I knew I had a really catchy, compelling bass line there. So then I started playing around with a kind of lead riff idea. And once I had this kind of call and response pattern down, just these elements alone, I felt like, yeah, I had the basis of a really strong track, so all I needed to do was add some drums and percussion, and we'll be away laughing. So drums, I'll quickly run through now. You can see here I've got my drum group, which I will just solo at a few different points in the arrangement so you can hear all the drum layers together. Cool, so we'll quickly run through the tracks one by one. So first I've got a couple of perks here on this track. So what I've done is just dragged in a couple of different percussive loops into a drum rack. So a couple of these loops just came from sample pack. Vengeance loops, pretty typical, pretty classic. Plenty of great usable loops in there. Of course, no fun if you just drag in a loop and call it a day. Always nice if you can edit and manipulate the loop in some way to put your own spin on it, which is, I like to think, what I've done here. So a couple of Vengeance loops on separate tracks and a couple of additional loops here. These are percussive samples that are sampled from Crash Bandicoot, classic PlayStation 1 game. I love sampling Crash Bandicoot, some really great percussion on those old PlayStation 1 game soundtracks. So what I've done, rather than just use these loops in a vanilla way, is you can see as I click through the different loops in my drum rack here, I've kind of like selected different portions of the loop, and then if I show you the pattern, I've kind of like layered up these different loops to kind of turn a couple of loops into a new loop of my own. So I'll show you what that sounds like. Okay, now what's really key to this particular drum track here, so I'm using this effect, just a stock Ableton effect called the Distortion Gate, which is a preset of the Dynamic Tube plugin. Okay, now I really love using this effect on percussion and drum tracks because essentially what you can do, it's called in the name Distortion Gate, kind of gates the sound, and as you can hear at the moment the sound is gated quite heavily, but then you can use the release control of the envelope to essentially adjust how aggressive that gating effect is, and then that's something I often like to automate in my tracks. So initially I'll keep the gate closed, or well, fairly tight, like the start. There's a poor example, but here we are. This is what it sounds like when the gate is very tight, and then I can slowly open that up. Right, play around with the intensity of this percussive loop throughout the arrangement. So yeah, I really like that Distortion Gate preset a lot. Delay a little bit, well, just the fake dub room preset, classic preset that I use a lot just to add a little bit of stereo width to a sound. Now I'm going to run out of time. At this pirate studio booth that I've rented, I've got about 7 minutes till I've got to leave, so I'm going to have to speed things up here. So that's enough on that track, so that's my percussive loops. Then I've got my kind of main bread and butter drum track here, so my main snare, hat, and ride. Right, fairly standard, nothing too exciting going on there. Snare is made up of a couple of different layers. What else have I got going on? Yeah, I mean, that's all pretty self-explanatory, straightforward stuff. The ride cymbal, I'm also using that same Distortion Gate preset just to, yeah, create a more interesting rhythm, I suppose, than what I had Right, that's without it. Nice. Snare Plate Digital Vintage, one of my favorite reverb presets. So this is just an Ableton preset of the hybrid reverb. It's one of my favorite presets to use on drums. Just a nice short reverb with plenty of character. Little bit of compression and overdrive to help glue it all together. Nicely done. Aside from that, we've just got a couple of other additional percussive loops that I can bring in throughout the arrangement to keep things interesting and build up the tension. So these 3 loops here, which I've called Shuffle, Shaker and Roll, these are all percussive loops that I've resampled from other tracks that I produced. So every now and then I like to go through old or archived Ableton tracks that are finished and just bounce out kind of little percussive loops so that I can resample them in my future projects. So one here, fake dub room again, just for a little bit of depth and width. Shaker. Using the old Beats warp mode trick just to tighten up the transients a little bit. Well, not enough time to explain that whole thing today, but yeah, there's plenty of videos online showing you those sorts of things, and I can also make another video in the future. And cool, so a lot of these percussive loops are of course sidechained to the kick just to help with that groove. And then I've got all of my drum tracks grouped up with some group processing, so reverb and drum bus and some EQ as well. So I'll just quickly show you what they sound like. So dry, reverb, yeah, and the drum bus. So you would have heard just there maybe that yeah, I was automating some parameters of the reverb just to kind of build up before the drop there, and you can hear that the drum bus really kind of crushes that reverb back into the dry signal. Which I love. Sounds great. So that's it, that's the main elements of the track. Just one last thing that I haven't shown you yet, and that is just a riser, just to, you know, build up some extra tension before the drop there at 65, and then the further drop later on the track. So this riser here I recorded with a Roland JP-808 synth. Always nice to have some hardware component recorded on a track that was otherwise made entirely in the box. So I'll just show you what that riser sounds like. Yeah, okay, I don't know if riser was really the most appropriate term there, but you know, effect, whatever. Standard high pass filter, bit of reverb. Notice that this reverb is a lot more of a large kind of big atmospheric reverb than the shorter, tighter reverbs that I've been using on my drums, for example, and some overdrive as well. So that in itself is also in the same group as my synth leads, and then I've just got a bit of glue compression and distortion from Soundtoys Decapitator on my synth group there. So I might just quickly show you how those help to gel things together. Fairly subtle-ish, just bringing some additional warmth and flavour And there you have it. I do also have a little bit of parallel processing going on with different parallel saturation buses on my return channels, and a little bit of EQ and saturation on my master bus as well. But yeah, I really am gonna run out of time in my Pirate Studio booking, so I'll have to leave things there. Hope you enjoyed the video. Again, as I said, if you did, let me know, because I'd be keen to maybe record some more track breakdowns and tutorial videos in the future as well. So yeah, go check it out. My track Just Farming Gems, released in December last year on Mood Supplier as part of my Repetitive Music to Grind to EP. Chip!